The Christian in Complete Armor by William Gurnall. Ephesians 6, verse 17. And take the helmet of salvation. These words present us with another piece in the Christian's panoply, a helmet to cover his head in the day of battle. It makes the fifth in the apostles' order, and what is observable, this and most of the pieces in this magazine are defensive arms, and all to defend the Christian from sin, none to secure him from suffering. First, they are mostly defensive arms. Indeed, there is but one of all the pieces in the whole panoply for offense, and that is the sword. It may be to give us this hint that this spiritual war of the Christian lies chiefly on the defense, and therefore requires arms most of this kind to wage it. God hath deposited a rich treasure of grace in every saint's heart. The devil's greatest spite is against this, to plunder him of which, and with it of his happiness, he commendeth a bloody war against him, so that the Christian overcomes his enemy, when himself is not overcome by him, his work being rather to keep what is his own, than to get what is his enemy's. And truly, were it well heeded that the saint's war lies chiefly on the defense, it would be of a single use to direct him how to manage his combats, both with Satan and his instruments. First with Satan. Look, Christian, that thou standest always in a defensive posture, with thy armor on, as a soldier, upon thy works, ready to defend the castle of thy soul, which God hath set thee to keep, and valiantly to repel Satan's assaults. Whenever he makes his approach, be not persuaded out of the line of thy place and calling, no, not under the specific tenses of zeal, and hope to get the greatest victory by falling to the enemy's quarters. Satan, if you let Satan be the assailant, and come, if he will, to tempt thee. But be not thou in a bravo to tempt him to do it. It is just he should be foiled that seeks his own danger. This got Peter his fall in the high priest's hall, who was left therefore cowardly to deny his master, that he might learn humbly to deny himself even after. Secondly, with Satan's instruments. Maybe they revile and reproach thee. Remember now thy part lies on the defense. Give not railing for railing, reproach for reproach. The gospel allows thee no liberty to use their weapons and return them. 1 Peter 3, verses 8 and 9. Be pitiful, be courageous, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise, blessing. Thou hast here a bridle and breastplate to defend thee from their bullets, the comfort of thy own sincerity and holy walking, with which thou mayest wipe off the dirt thrown upon thy face, but no weapon for self-revenge. A shield is put upon thy hand, which thou mayest lift up to quench their fierce darts, but no darts or bitter words to retort upon them. Thou art shod with peace, that thou mayest walk safely upon the injuries they do thee, without any prick or pain to thy spirit, but not with pride to trample upon the persons that wrong thee. Secondly, all the pieces are to defend the Christian from sin, none to secure him from suffering. They are to defend him in suffering, not privilege him from it. He must prepare the more for suffering because he is so well furnished with armor to bear it. Armor is not given for men to wear by the fireside, but in the field. How shall the Maker be praised if the metal of his arms be not known? And where shall it be put to the proof but amidst swords and bullets? He that desires to live all his days in a state of ease and security will never make a good Christian. Resolve for hardships and lay down thy arms. Here is the true reason why so few come at the beat of Christ's drums to his standard. and so many of those few that have enlisted themselves by an external profession under him within a while drop away and leave his colors. It is suffering work they are sick of. Most men are more tender of their skin than of their conscience, and had rather the gospel had provided armor to defend their bodies from death and danger than their souls from sin and Satan. But I come to the words, and take the helmet of salvation, in which we may observe, first, the copulative, that class this to the former piece, and secondly, the piece of armor itself, the helmet of salvation. Chapter 1. Within the concatenation of graces in their birth, growth, and decay is set forth. First, the copulative and take, that is, with the shield of faith and all the other pieces of armor here set down. Take this also into the field with you. See how every grace is lovingly coupled to its fellow, and all at last, though many pieces make but one suit. And note which this point at is, and concatenation of graces. Note, the sanctifying, saving graces of God's Spirit are linked inseparably together. There is a connection of them one to another, and that in their birth, growth, and decay. Section 1. In their birth. Where one sanctifying grace is, the rest are all to be found. It is not so common gifts and graces. These are paralleled out like the gifts Abraham bestowed on the children he had by his concubines. Genesis chapter 25, verse 6. One hath this grace, another hath that, none hath all. He that hath a gift of knowledge may want a gift of utterance, and so of the rest. But sanctifying graces are like the inheritance he gave Isaac. Every true believer hath them all given him. He that is in Christ is a new creature. Behold, all things are become new. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Now the new creature contains all. All natural corruption is an universal principle of all sin that sours the whole lump of man's nature. So is sanctifying grace a universal principle that sweetly seasons and renews the whole man at once, though not wholly. Grace comes, saith one, into the soul, as the soul into the body at once. Indeed, it grows by steps, but is born at once. The new creature hath all its parts formed together, though not its degrees. Some one grace may be perceived to stir, and so come under the Christian's notion before another. He may feel his fear of God putting forth itself in a new holy trembling, and awe upon his spirit at the thoughts of God, before he sees his faith in the fiduciary recumbency of his soul upon God. Yet the one grace is not produced before the other. One part of the world hath been discovered to us long before the other. Yea, all the world was made together. Now this connection of graces in their birth is of double use. First, to relieve the sincere Christian when in doubt of his gracious state, because he cannot at present discern in his soul some particular graces which he inquires for. Possibly it is faith thou hast been looking for, and it is not anywhere to be heard of. Well, Christian, do not presently unsaint thyself, till thou hast been farther trial of thyself. Send out therefore thy spies to search for some other grace, as of thy love to Christ. Maybe thou wilt hear some tidings of this grace, though the other is not in view. Hath not thy love to God and Christ been seen by thee in such temptation, chasing it away with Joseph's answer to his wanton mistress? How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Yea, mayest thou not see it all the day long, neither in thy sincere care to please him, or hearty sorrow when thou hast done anything that grieves him, in which two veins run the life-blood of the soul's life to Christ. Now know to thy comfort that thy love can tell thee news of thy faith. As Christ said in another case, He that hath seen me has seen my Father. John chapter 14, verse 9. So say I to thee, thou that hast seen thy love to Christ, hast seen thy faith in the face of thy love. But now be thy love to Christ is also lodged in a cloud. When then see whether thou canst espy no evangelical repentancy, loathing thee with the sight of thy sins, as also inspiring thee with revenge against them, as those enemies which drew thee into rebellion against God. Yea, as the bloody weapons with which thou hast so often wounded the name and murdered the Son of God. Behold the grace which looketh for stands before thee. What is love to God, if zeal against sin, as God's enemy be not? Did not Abishai love David, when his heart so boiled over with rage against Shimei for cursing David, that he could not help breaking out into a passion, saying, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, I pray thee, and take off his head. 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 9. And by thy own acknowledgment it troubles thee as much to hear thy lust barked against God, and thy will is as good to be the death of them, if God would but grant his consent, as ever Abishai's was to strike the traitor's head off. And yet art thou in doubt whether thou lovest God or no? Truly then thou canst not see love for zeal. Thus, as by taking hold of one link you may draw up the rest of the chain that lies under water, so by discovering one grace you may bring all to sight. Joseph and Mary were indeed deceived when they supposed their son to be in the company of their kindred. Luke 2:44. But thou canst not do so here, for this holy kindred of graces go together. They are knit as members of the body, one to another. Though you see only the face of a man, yet you doubt not, but the whole man is there. Secondly, as it may relieve the sincere Christian, so it will help to expose and put the hypocrite to shame, who makes great pretenses to some one grace when he hates another at the same time, a certain sign of a false heart. He never had any grace that loves not all graces. Moses would not go out of Egypt with half his company. Exodus 10:26. Either all must go or none. Neither will the Spirit of God come into a soul with half his sanctifying graces, but all his train. If therefore thy heart be set against any one grace, it proves thou art a stranger to the rest, and though thou mayest seem a great admirer of one grace, yet the opposition which thou showest to others washes off the paint of this fair cover. He that loves or hates one saint as such does the same by every saint. So he that cordially closes with one grace will find every grace endeared to him, for they are like one to another, as one sunbeam is to another. Section 2. Sanctifying graces are connected in their growth and decay. Increase one grace, and you strengthen all. Impair one, and you will be a loser in all. And the reason is because they are reciprocally helpful to each other, so that when one grace is wounded, the assistance which it would, if in temper, contribute to the Christian's common stock is either entirely lost or much lessened. When love cools, obedience slackens and goes on heavily, because it wants the oil of its wheel, which love used to drop. When obedience faltered, faith weakens. How can there be great faith where there is little faithfulness? When faith is weak, hope presently wavers, for it is the credit of faith's report, and hope goes on to expect good from God, and hope wavering patience becomes a bankrupt, and can keep his shop open no longer, because it trades with the stock which hope lends it. If the body you observe, there are many members, yet all make this one body, and every member is so useful that the others are beholden to it. So in the Christian there are many graces, but one new creature, and the eyes of knowledge cannot say to the hand of faith, I have no need of thee. Neither can the hand of faith say to the foot of obedience, but all are preserved by the mutual care they have of one another. For as ruin to the whole city may enter at a breach in one part of its wall, and the soul run out through a wound in a particular member of the body, so the ruin of all graces may, yea, must, needs follow all the ruin of any one. There is indeed a stronger bond of union between graces of our souls than there is between the members of our body. It is possible, yea, ordinary, for some member to be cut off from the body without the death of the whole, because all the members of the body are not vital parts, but every grace is a vital part in the new creature, and so essential to its very being that its absence cannot be supplied. In the body, one eye can make a shift to do the office of its fellow which is put out, and one hand do the other's work that is cut off, though may be not so exactly. But faith cannot do the office of love, nor love the work of obedience. The lack of one wheel spoils the motion of the whole clock, and if one grace be wanting, the end would not be obtained for which this rare piece of workmanship is worked up in the saint's heart. First, let it learn thee, Christian, this wisdom, whenever thou findest any grace weakened, either through thy negligence in not attempting to do it, or Satan's temptations, wounding it, speedily to endeavor the recovery of it, because thou dost not only lose the comfort which the exercise of this one grace might bring, but thou weakenest all the others. Is he a bad husband who hazards the fall of his house by suffering a hole or two in the roof? What then art thou who puttest thy whole gracious state in danger by neglecting a timely repair to the breach made in one of thy graces? And so, when thou art tempted to any sin, look not on it as a single sin, but as having all other sins in thy belly. Consider what thou doest before thou gratifiest Satan in any one motion. For by one sin thou strengthenest the whole body to sin. Give to one sin, and they will send more beggars at your door, and they will come with a stronger plea than the former. Why mayest thou not do this for them as well as for the other? The best way is to keep the door shut to all, lest, while thou intendest to entertain only one, all crowd in. But if it were possible that thou couldst break this connection of sin, so as to take off one link that pleases thee best, and not draw the whole chain after thee by committing this, yet know there is a connection of guilt also. James 2:10. Whosoever shall keep the whole law, and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. As he that administereth to the estate of one deceased, though it be never so little, that he takes into his hands, becomes liable to pay all his debts and bring all his creditors upon him. So by tampering but with one sin, and that a little one, thou bringest the whole law upon thy back, which will arrest thee upon God's suit, as a transgressor of all his commands. Thus the law is copulative, as affront done to one redounds to the dishonor of all, and so is resented by God, the lawgiver, whose authority is equally in all. Secondly, this may be comfort to those who trouble themselves with the thoughts of future changes which may befall them. And what shall they do then? Say they. Now blessed be God that make a shift to serve God in their place. But what if straits come, poverty, sickness, or other crosses? How shall they then behave? Where is their faith, patience, and other suffering graces that should enable them to walk on these ways without sinking? They fear, alas, that little of these suffering graces is in their hands. Well, Christian, for thy encouragement, know if the graces of the present condition, those which God calls thee to exercise now in thy prosperous state, be lively, thou mayest comfortably hold the same. When God changes the scene of thy affairs and calls them upon the stage to act their part, the more humble thou art now with thy abundance, the more patience thou wilt certainly show thyself in thy penury. So much as thy heart is now above, the world's enjoyments, even so much thou wilt be above the troubles and sorrows of it. Trees grow proportionally underground to what they do above, and the Christians will find something like this in the graces. End of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17, chapter 1. Having been read by Peter John Paresis. The Christian in Complete Armor by William Gurnall. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17a. And take the helmet of salvation. Chapter 2. Of the nature of hope, why styled hope of salvation, and why compared to a helmet. We have done with the connective particle, whereby this piece is coupled to the former, and now come to address our discourse to the piece of armor itself. Take the helmet of salvation. Though we have not here, as in all the other, the grace expressed, yet we need not be at a loss for it if we consult another place, where our apostle lends us a key to decipher his meaning in this. 1 Thessalonians 1:8. And for a helmet the hope of salvation, so that, without any scruple, we shall determine upon the grace of hope as intended by the Holy Ghost in this place. Now, in order to a treatise of this grace, it is requisite that something be said by explanation, which may serve as a light set up in the entry to lead us the better into several rooms of the point which is to be the subject of our discourse. Section 1. We shall first show the nature of this grace of hope, which will be best done by laying down a plain description of it, and briefly explicating the parts. Hope is a supernatural grace of God, whereby the believer, through Christ, expects and waits for all those good things of the promise, which at present he hath not fully received. First, here is the author or efficient cause of it, God, who is called the God of all grace, 1 Peter 5:10, that is the giver and worker of all grace, both to the first seed and the further growing of it. It is impossible for the creature to make the least pile of grass, or being made to make it grow, and as impossible to produce the least seed of grace in the heart, or add 1 cubit to the stature of it. No, as God is the Father of the rain, by which the herbs in the field spring and grow, so also of those spiritual dews and influences that must make every grace thrive and flourish. The Apostle teaches us this, when he prays that God will perfect, establish, strengthen, settle them, and as of all grace in general, so of this in particular, Romans 15:13, where he is styled the God of hope, and by whom we abound in hope also. This hope is supernatural, and thereby distinguished from the heathen's hope, which, with the rest of their moral virtues, so far as any excellency were found in them, came from God, to whom every man that cometh into the world is beholden for all the light he hath, John 1:9, and is but the remains of man's first noble principles, as sometimes we shall see a broken turret or two stand in the midst of the ruins of some stately palace demolished, which serve for little more than to help the spectator to give a guess what goodly buildings once stood there. Secondly, hope's subject, the believer. True hope is a jewel that no one wears but Christ's bride, a grace with which no one is graced but the believer's soul. Christless and hopeless are joined together, Ephesians 2:12. And here it is not amiss to observe the order in which hope stands to faith. In regard of time they are not one but another, but in order of nature and operational faith hath the precedence of hope. Faith closes with the promise as a true and faithful word. Then hope lifts up the soul to wait for the performance of it. Who goes out to meet him whom he believes will not come? The promise is, as it were, God's love letter to his church and spouse, in which he opens his very heart and tells all he means to do for her. Faith reads and embraces it with joy, whereupon the believing soul by hope looks out at this window with a longing expectation to see her husband's chariot come in the accomplishment thereof. So Paul gives a reason of his own hope from his faith, Acts 24 verses 14 and 15, and prays for the Romans' faith in order to their hope, Romans 15:13. Thirdly, hope's object. Number 1. In general, something that is good. If a thing be evil, we fear and fly from it. If good, we hope and wait for it. And here is one note of difference between it and faith. Faith believes evil as well as good. Hope is conversant only about good. Number 2. It is the good of the promise, and in this faith and hope agree. Both their lines are drawn from the same center of the promise. Hope without a promise is like an anchor without ground to hold by. It bears the promise on its name. I stand and am judged, saith Paul, for the hope of the promise. Acts 26 verse 6. So David shows where he moors his ship and casts his anchor. I hope in my word, Psalms 119 verse 81. True hope will trade only for true good. And we can call nothing so that the good God hath not promised. For the promise runs thus, no good thing will be withholden from him that walketh uprightly. Psalms 84 verse 11. Number 3. All the good things of the promise, as God hath encircled all good in the promise, so he hath promised nothing but good. And therefore hope's object is all that the promise holds forth. Only as the matter of the promise hath more degrees of goodness, so hope longs more earnestly for it. God is the chief good, and the fruition of him is promised as the utmost happiness of the creature. Therefore true hope takes your chief aim at God. It makes all other promises and is subservience to lift the soul near into him. He is called the hope of Israel. Jeremiah chapter 17 verse 13. There is nothing beyond God, the enjoying of whom the believer projects, and nothing short of God that he can be content with. Now, because God is only enjoyed fully and securely in heavenly bliss state, therefore it is called the hope of glory. Colossians chapter 1 verse 27. Of eternal life. Titus 3:7. Of salvation. 1 Thessalonians 5:8. Lastly, the object of hope is the good of the promise, not in hand, but yet to be performed. Hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? Romans 8:24. Futurity is intrinsical in hope's object, and distinguishes it from faith, which gives a present being to the promise, and is the substance of things hoped for. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1. The good of the promise hath a kind of subsistence by faith in the soul. It brings the Christian and heaven together, as if he were there already. Hence, they are said by faith to embrace the promise. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 13, as two friends when they meet. Faith speaks in the present tense. We are conquerors, yea, we are more than conquerors. Partial performance of the promise intends hope, but complete performance ends hope, and swallows it up in love and joy. Indeed, either the full performance of the promise or execution of the threatening shuts out all hope. In heaven the promise is paid, and hope dismissed, because we have what was looked for. And in hell the threatening is fully inflicted, and therefore there is no hope to be found among the damned, because there is no possibility of release. Fourthly, hope's aid, by whose help and for whose sake it expects to obtain the promise, and that is Jesus Christ. It waits for all in and through him. He is therefore called our hope. 1 Timothy 1:1. Because through him we hope for what is promised, by whose death we have leave and liberty to expect good from God, and by whose Spirit we have ability to hope, so that both the authority and strength to hope come from Christ, the former by the infusion of his blood for us, the latter by the infusion of the Spirit into us. Section 2. Why is the Christian's hope styled a hope of salvation? A double reason is obvious. First, because salvation comprehends and takes within its circle the whole object of the Christian's hope. Salvation imports a complete state of bliss wherein meet imminently the mercies and enjoyment of all the promises, scattered, some in one and some in another, as at the creation the light which was first diffused through the firmament was gathered afterwards into the sun. Cast up the particular sums of all the good things promised in the covenant, and the total they amount unto is salvation. The Ultima unites, gives the denomination to the number. Because it comprehends all, so salvation, the ultimate object of the Christian's expectation, and that which comprehends the rest, denominates this hope. Secondly, it is called the hope of salvation, to distinguish it from the worldling's hope, whose portion, Psalms 17:14, is in this life, and so is his hope also. It is confessed that many of these pretend to a hope of salvation, but the truth is they neither have a right to it, nor are they very eager of it. They think themselves so well seated in this world, and if they might have their wish, it should be that God would not remove them hence. Even when they say they hope to be saved, their conscience tells them they had rather stay here than part with this world, in hope to mend themselves and the other. They blow up themselves into a hope and desire of salvation, more out of a dread of hell than a liking in heaven. There are none, I think, so mad among them, but had rather be saved than damned. Like in heaven, they lie in hell. Yet they like this world better than all. Section 3. The third inquiry is why hope is compared to a helmet. First, the helmet defends the head, a principal part of the body, from bullet and sword. So this hope of salvation defends the soul, the principal part of man, and the principal faculty of that, whereby no dangerous impressions can, by Satan or sin, be made on it. Temptations may trouble, but cannot hurt, except their darts enter the will, and leave a wound there, by drawing it to some consent and liking of them, from which this helmet of hope, if it be the right make and sits sure on the Christian's head, will defend him. It is hard to draw him into any treasonable practice against this prince, who is both well satisfied of his favor at present, and stands also upon the stairs of hope, expecting assuredly to be called up within a while to the highest preferment that the court can afford, or his king give. No, the weapons of rebellion and treason are usually forged and fashioned by discontent, when subjects take themselves to be neglected or slighted by their prince, think their preferment, are now at an end, and must look for no favor to come from him. This prepares them to receive every impression of disloyalty that any enemy to the king shall attempt to stamp them with, as in the Israelites, who, thinking the men of Judah, of whose tribe the king was, had got a monopoly of his favor, and themselves shut out from sharing equally with them therein. How soon are they, even at a blast or two of Sheba's seditious trumpet, made rebellions against their sovereign. We have no part in David, saith Sheba, neither have we any inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 1. And see how this treason runs, even like a squib upon a robe. Verse 2. Every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba. Thus, if once the soul fears it hath no part in God, and expect no inheritance from him, I know no sin so great, but it may be drawn to commit. Secondly, as the helmet defends the soldier's head from being wounded, so his heart also from swooning. It makes him bold and fearless in battle, though amidst swords and bullets. Goliath, with his helmet of brass and other furnitures, how confidently and daringly did the man come on, as if he had been so enclosed in his armor, that it was impossible any weapon could come near to deliver a message of death unto him. This made him carry his crest so high and defy a whole host, till at last he paid his life for his pride and folly. But here is a helmet which whoever wears need never be put to shame for his holy blasphemy. God himself allows him to do, and will bear him out of this rejoicing of his helmet. Hope. They shall not be ashamed that wait for me. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 23. This made holy David so undaunted in the midst of his enemies. Though a host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Psalms 27, verse 3. His hope would not suffer his heart so much as to beat within him for any fear of what they could do to him, and he had his helmet of salvation on, and therefore he said, verse 6, Mine head shall be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. A man cannot drown so long as his head is above water. Now, it is the proper office of hope to do this for the Christian in times of any danger. Luke chapter 21, verse 28. When these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. A strange thing one would think for Christ, then, to bid his disciples lift up their heads when they see other men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Verse 26. Yet now is the time of the rising of the sun, when others is setting the blackness of darkness is overtaking others. Because now the Christian's feast is coming, for which hope hath saved its stomach so long. Your redemption draweth nigh. Two things make the head hang down, fear and shame. Hope eases the Christian's heart of both these, and so forbids him to give any sign of a desponding mind by a dejected countenance. I come now to lay down the one general point of doctrine from which our whole discourse on this piece of armor shall be drawn. End of chapter 2, having been read by Peter John Persis. The Christian in Complete Armor by William Gurnall. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17a. Chapter 3. Of the use of hope in the Christian's warfare, and of the high and noble exploits it raises the Christian to undertake. Hope is a grace of singular use and service to us all, along with our spiritual warfare and Christian course. We are directed to take the helmet of salvation, and this is not for some particular occasion and then hang it up till another extraordinary strait calls us to take it down and use it again. But we must take it so as never to lay it aside till God shall take off this helmet to put on a crown of glory in the room of it. Be sober and hope to the end is the Apostle Peter's counsel, 1 Peter 1:13. There are some engines of war that are of use but now and then, as ladders for scaling a town or fort, which done, they are laid aside for a long time and are not missed. But the helmet is of continual use. We shall need it as long as our war with sin and Satan lasts. The Christian is not beneath hope as long as above ground, nor above hope as long as he is beneath heaven. Indeed, when once he enters the gates of that glorious city, then farewell hope and welcome love forever. He may say with the holy martyr, armor becomes earth, but robes heaven. Hope goes into the field and waits on the Christian till the last battle be fought, and the field cleared, and then faith and hope together carry him in the chariot of the promise to heaven's door, where they deliver up his soul into the hands of love and joy, which stand ready to conduct him into the blissful presence of God. But that I may speak more particularly of hope's serviceableness to the Christian and the several offices it performeth for him, I shall reduce all to 4 heads. First, hope of salvation puts the Christian upon high and noble exploits. It is a grace born for great actions. Hope and faith are the 2 poles on which all the Christian's noble enterprises turn. As carnal hope excites carnal men to their achievements, which gain them renown in the world, so is this heavenly hope influential into the saints' undertakings. What makes the merchant sell house and land and ship his whole estate away to the other end of the world, and this amidst 1,000 hazards from pirates, waves, and winds, but the hope of getting a greater by this bold adventure? What makes the daring soldier rush into the furious battle, into the very mouth of death itself, but the hope of snatching honor and spoil out of its jaws? Hope in his helmet, shield, and all, which makes him laugh in the face of all danger. In a word, what makes the scholar beat his brain so hard, sometimes with the hazard of breaking them, by overstraining his part with too eager and hot a pursuit of learning, but the hope of commencing some degrees higher in the knowledge of those secrets in nature which are locked up from vulgar understanding, who, when he hath obtained his desire, is paid but little better for all his pains and study, which have worn nature in him to the stumps, than he is that tears the flesh off his hands and knees, with creeping up some craggy mountain, which proves but a barren bleak place to stand in, and wraps himself up in the clouds from the sight of others, leaving him little more to please himself with but this, that he can look over other men's heads and see a little farther than they. Now if these hopes can prevail with men, so as to have such fixed resolutions for the obtaining of these poor, sorry things, which borrow part of their goodness from men's fancy and imaginations, how much more effectual must the Christian's hope of eternal life be, to provoke him to the achievement of more noble exploits? Let a few instances suffice. Section 1. This hope raises in the Christian a heroic resolution against the lust that held him before in bondage. The Israelites, who suffered so tamely under their Egyptian burdens, without any attempt made by them to shake off the oppressor's yoke, when Moses came from God to give them hope of an approaching salvation, and his report had gained some credit by them, what a mighty change the impression of their newly conceived hope made upon them. On a sudden their courage returns, and their blood, which anguish and despair had so long chilled, grows warm again. They who before hardly durst let their groans be heard, so broken were their spirits with hard labor, now fortified with hope, burst open their prison doors, and march out of Egypt towards the place of rest promised, in defiance of all the power and wrath of the enraged Pharaoh who pursued them. Truly, thus it is with the soul in regard of sin's bondage. Oh, how impotent and poor-spirited is a soul void of this heavenly hope! What a tame slave hath Satan of him! He is the footstool of every base lust to trample upon. He suffers the devil to ride him whether he pleases, without wincing. No puddle so filthy but Satan may draw him through with a thread. The poor wretch is well enough contented with his ignoble servitude, because he knows no better master than him he serves, no better wages than the swill of his sensual pleasures, which his lusts allow him. But let the news of salvation come to the ear of this sin-deluded soul, and a spiritual eye be given him to see the transcendent glory thereof, with a crevice of hope set open to him, that he is the person that shall inherit it, if willing to make an exchange of Satan for Christ, and the slavery of his lust for the liberty of his Redeemer's service. Oh, what havoc then does the soul begin to make among his lusts! He presently vows the death of them all, and sets his head at work how he may soonest and most effectually rid his hands of them. Every man that hath this hope purifieth himself, even as he is pure. 1 John 3, verse 3. He now looks upon his lust with no better eye than a captive prince would do on his cruel keepers, out of whose hands could he make his escape. He should presently enjoy his crown and kingdom, and therefore meditates his utmost revenge upon them there may be some hasty purposes taken up by a carnal men against their lust upon some accidental discontent they meet with, now and then in the prosecution of them. But alas, the swords they draw against them are soon in their sheaths again, and all the seeming fray comes to nothing in the end. They, like Esau, go out full and angry, but a present comes from their lust, which bids them from hurting them. Yea, so reconciles them to them, that, as he did by his brother, they can fall upon the necks of those lusts to kiss them, which a while before they threatened to kill, and all for want of a true hope of heaven. He that hath a mind to provide himself with arguments against sin's motions need not go far to seek them, but he that handles this one well, and drives it home to the head, will not need many more. What is the sin this would not prostrate? Art thou tempted to any sensual lust? Ask thy hope what thou expected to be in heaven. Canst thou yield to play the beast on earth, who hopest to be made like the pure and holy angels in heaven? Is it a sin of profit which bewitcheth thee? Is not the hope of heaven a spell strong enough to charm his devil? Can gold bear any sway with thee, thou that hopest to be heir of the city where gold bears no price? Wherefore is that blissful place said to be paved with gold, but to let us know it shall be there trampled upon as of no account? And wilt thou let it now lie in thy heart, that will ere long be laid under thy foot? It is a sin of revenge. Dost thou not hope for a day when thy dear Saviour will plead for thy cause? And what need hast thou then to take his work out of his hand? Let him be his own judge, who hath no hope. The judge, when he comes, will take thy part. Section 2. This hope encourages and enables the Christian to condemn the present world, with all its pomp, treasure, and pleasure, to which the rest of the sons of men are basely enslaved. When once faith makes discovery of the land which the Christian hath lying in heaven, and by hope he begins to calculate upon it as that which he shall shortly take up by his removal from earth, truly then the price of this world's happiness falls low in his account. He can sell all his hopes from it very cheap. Yes, he can part with what he hath in hand of this world's growth, when God calls him to it more freely than Alexander did the cities he took, because when all this is gone, he shall leave himself a better hope than that great monarch had to live upon. The hope of heaven leaves a blot upon the world and the Christian's thoughts. It is no more now to him than the asses were to anointed Saul. We are told of some Turks who have, upon the sight of Muhammad's tomb, plucked out their eyes, that they might not defile them, forsooth, with any common object after they had been blessed with seeing one so sacred. I am so sure many a gracious soul there hath been, who, by a prospect of heaven's glory, set before the eye of their faith, have been so ravished by the sight, that they have desired God even to seal up their eyes by death, with Simeon, who would not by his good will have lived a day after that blessed hour in which his eyes had beheld the salvation of God. Abraham was under the hope of this salvation, and therefore he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, for he looked for a city which hath no foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9 and 10. Cana would have satisfied him well enough if God had not told him of a heaven that he meant to give him, in comparison into which Cana is now but Cabul, a dirty land in his judgment. So Paul tells us not only the low thoughts he hath himself of the world, but as they agree with the common sense of all believers, whose hope is to come to any settlement. For our conversation is in heaven, from whence we look for the Savior. Philippians 3:20. Mark, he sets the saints with their back upon earth, and draws his reason from their hope, from whence we look, etc. Indeed, he that looks on heaven must needs look off earth. The soul's eye can, as little as the body's, be above and below at the same time. Every man converses most where he hopes to receive his greatest advantage. The publican sits at the receipt of custom. There comes in his gains. The courtier stands at his prince's elbow. The merchant he must look for in his warehouse or at the exchange. But the Christian's hope carries him by all these doors. Where is not my hope, saith the soul, and therefore not my haunt. My hope is in heaven, from whence I look for the Savior, and my salvation to come from him. There I live, walk, and wait. Nothing but a steadfast, well-grounded hope of salvation can buy off the creature's worldly hopes. The heart of man cannot be in the world without a hope, and if he hath no hope for heaven, it must of necessity have a hope for earth such as it can afford. What can suit an earthly heart better than an earthly hope? And that which is a man's hope, though poor and trifling, is highly prized, and with difficulty parted with, as we see in a man who is likely to be drowned, and hath only some weed by the bankside to hold by. He will die with it in his hand, rather than let go. He will endure blows and wounds, rather than loose his hold. Nothing can take him from it, but that which he hopes may serve better to save him from drowning. Thus it is with a man whose hope is set upon the world, and whose happiness expected from thence. Oh, how such a one hugs and hangs about the world! You may as soon persuade a fox to come out of his hole, which he hath taken sanctuary from the dogs, as such a one to cast off his hopes. No, he is undone without this peth and that honor. It is that which he hath laid up his hopes in, and hope and life are kept in the same hand. Scare and threaten him with what you will, still the man's heart will hold its own. Yea, throw hellfire into his bosom, and tell him this love of the world, and making gold his hope, will damn him another day. Still he will hold to his way. Felix is an instance of this. Acts chapter 24, verse 26. Paul preached an excellent sermon before him, and though the preacher was at the bar, and Felix on the bench, yet God so armed the word that he trembled to hear the prisoners speak of righteousness and judgment to come. Yet this man, notwithstanding his conscience, was struggling with the fears of judgment, and some sparks of divine vengeance had taken fire on him, could at the same time be sending out his heart on a covetous errand to look for a bribe, for want of which he left that blessed servant of God in his bloody enemy's hands. For it is said, he hoped that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. But he missed his market. For, as a sordid hope of a little money made him basely refuse to deliver Paul, so the blessed hope which Paul had for another world made him more honorably disdain to purchase his deliverance at his hands with a bribe. Section 3. This hope of salvation, where it is steadfast, makes the Christian active and zealous for God. It is called a lively hope, 1 Peter 1:3. They are men of mettle that have it. You may expect more from him than many others, and not be deceived. Why are men dull and heavy in the service of God? Truly because their hopes are so. Hopeless and lifeless go together. No wonder the work goes hardly off hand when men have no hope to be well paid for their labor. He that thinks he works for a song will not sing at his work. I mean, forward it. The best customer is sure to be served best and first, and him we count the best customer, whom we hope will be the best paymaster. If God be thought so, we will leave all to do his business. This made Paul engage so deeply in the service of the gospel, even to lose his worldly friends and lay his own life at stake. It was for the hope of the promise, Acts 26, verse 6. This made the other Israelites that feared God follow the trade of godliness so close, verse 7, unto which promise are 12 tribes instantly serving God day and night, hope to come. Mark, they are both instant and constant. They run with full speed, stretching themselves forth as in a race, and this night and day. No stop, no halting. And what is it keeps them in breath? Even the hope that they shall at last come to that salvation promise. Nothing better to clear the soul of sloth and listlessness of spirit in the service of God than hope well improved and strengthened. It is the very psychic which the apostle prescribes for this disease. Psalms chapter 6, verse 11 and 12. We desire every one of you to show the name diligent to the full assurance of hope unto the end that ye be not slothful. Section 4. Hope begets in a Christian a holy impatience after further attainment, especially when it grows to some strength. The higher our hopes of salvation rise, the more will our hearts widen themselves in holy desire. Romans 8:23. Not only they, but we ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of the body. Methinks rejoicing would better become them for what they had already than groaning for what they have not. Who can better stay long for their dinner than they who have their stomachs stayed with a good breakfast? They would hold in bodily food, but not spiritual. No doubt the sweetness which they tasted from their first fruits in hand did cheer their spirits, but the thoughts of what was behind made them groan. Hope waits for all, and will not let the soul sit down contented till all the dishes be on the board, till the whole harvest that stands on the field of the promise be reaped. Yea, the more the Christian hath received in partial payments, the deeper groans hope makes the soul fetch for what is behind. And that first, because these foretastes acquaint the Christian more with the nature of those joys which are in heaven, and so enlarge his understanding to have more raised conceptions of the happiness which they enjoy that are arrived there. And the increasing of his knowledge must needs enlarge his desires, and those desires break into sad groans to think what sweet wine is drunk in full bowls by glorified saints, and be living where only a sip is allowed that doth not satisfy but kindle his thirst. It is harder now for him to live on this side of heaven than before he knew so much. He is like one that stands at the door where the company sit at a rich feast. He hears how merry they are. Through the keyhole he sees what variety they have, and by a little which he tastes from the trenchers brought out, he learns how delicious their fare is. Oh, how such a one! He learns how delicious their fare is. Oh, how such a one's teeth would water after their cheer, which another misses not, who hears not of it, or only hears but tastes not of their dainties. The nearer the soul stands to heaven, the more he knows of their joys, and the more he blesses them and pities himself. None long for heaven more than those who enjoy most of heaven. All delays now are exceedingly tenuous. Their continual moan is, why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the wheels of his chariot? The last year is thought longer by the apprentice than all his time before, because now it is nearer out. And if delays are so tenuous, then what then are desertions to such a soul who hath his hope of salvation raised high by the sweet lapses of the Spirit and foretaste of glory? No doubt Moses' death so nigh Canaan, after he had tasted the fruit of the land at the hand of the spies, was exceedingly grievous. To lose a child grown up, when we seem ready to reap our hopes conceived of him, is more than to part with two in the cradle, that have not yet drawn out our expectations. The Christian indeed cannot quite lose his hopes, yet he may have them nibbled, as a forward spring by after claps of winter weather pinches so much more because the warm beams of the sun had made the herbs come forth and discloses themselves. And so desertions from God made the saddest impressions upon those above all others whose expectations have advanced far, and by the present sense of divine goodness been unfolded into a kind of rejoicing through hope of glory, now to meet with the damp from the frowns of the Almighty and be benighted by the withdrawing of that light which so ravished it. How dreadful must this sudden change be! Secondly, these present attainments of grace or comfort embolden the soul to expect yet more, and so provoke the Christian to press on for the full payment of all. See both these in David, Psalms 63, verse 7. Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. The present boon which he hath got makes him rejoice in hope of what is yet to come, and by this sense he is carried out with full cry to pursue the chase for more, as appears in the next words, verse 1. My soul followeth hard after thee. And no wonder if we consider that God gives his people their experiences with this very notion stamped on them, that is, to raise their expectations for further mercies at his hand. Hosea 2:15. I will give her her vineyards from thence, in the valley of Achor for a door of hope. God is there speaking to a soul converted and newly taken into the covenant. What blessings he will bestow on it as the happy effects of its reconciliation to God and marriage with Christ. And he alludes to his dealing with Israel, who came out of a desolate wilderness into a pleasant, fruitful country, in the very entrance whereof this Achor lay, which when God gave them, he would not have them look on it as in itself it was but a little spot of ground and not so much worth, but as the opening of a door through which he would undertake to let them into the possession of the whole land in the process of time, which circumstance, believed by them, made Joshua advance his banners with so much courage against the proudest of his enemies, well knowing man could not shut that door upon them which God had opened. Thus, every particular assistance God gives the Christian against any corruption is intended by God to be an Achor, a door of hope, from which he may expect the total overthrow of that cursed seed in his bosom. When he adds the least degree of strength to his grace or comfort, he gives us a door of hope, that he will consummate both in glory. Oh, what courage must this needs bring to thee, poor heart, in thy fears and faintings. Paul had many enemies at emphasis to oppose him, but having an effectual door open unto him for his encouragement, he went by on undauntedly. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 9. As an army, after stubborn resistance by the enemy, who labor what they can to keep them out, the gate of the city flies open, then the soldiers press in amain with a shout. Thus, after much wrestling with God for pardon of sin and strength against sin, the door of promise flies open, and God comes in with some assisting, comforting presence. Now hope takes heart and makes the soul fall on with double zeal. End of chapter 3.